On my daughter's wedding day, as everyone was raising their glasses to celebrate, my 5-year-old nephew pulled me aside and whispered, "Grandpa, you have to stop this wedding right now." I was speechless. How could I ruin my daughter's happiness on her most important day, until the truth I heard next made my blood run cold. Before I tell you all, like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on dramatic stories like this. At my daughter Emily's wedding, the air shimmered with celebration. Music pulsed joyfully through the hall, wine glasses clinked in cheerful rhythm, and laughter spilled into the golden glow of chandeliers strung across the reception. In that sea of merriment, my grandson Ethan tugged at my sleeve. His eyes had darkened, trembling as though he had glimpsed the devil himself, standing among the blissful crowd. His small hand clutched the cuff of my jacket, slick with a cold sweat. Leaning close, he whispered with a terror that froze the breath in my lungs, "Grandpa, you have to stop this wedding right now." I blinked at him, startled. "Why, Ethan?" I asked. But even as the words left my lips, my heartbeat thundered, hammering against my ribs as though it might burst free. He lifted his gaze, voice low but cutting, and spoke the truth that shattered everything. The words sliced through me like a blade, tearing apart the fragile illusion of happiness I had just begun to accept. In an instant, the joyful noise of the wedding became hollow. Every smile around me nothing more than a fragile mask. 30 minutes later, while the band still played its rehearsed melodies and the chandeliers cast their dazzling light, the cold flash of police sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights bled through the tall windows of the hall, painting the celebration in ominous colors. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floors, sharp and unyielding. Justice did not knock. It struck like lightning, sudden and merciless, tearing through the illusion of a perfect day. Before we dive deeper into this dramatic story, I want to invite you to pause for just a second. Take this moment to click the subscribe button right below and tap the notification bell so you won't miss a single twist in the chapters to come. And tell me, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it where you are? I look forward to reading your answers in the comments, because each response makes this community feel more alive. Remember, what you share here helps others discover these gripping, true-to-life stories. We're about to step into the part where everything turns upside down in an instant, so don't forget to leave your mark beneath this video. Richard Collins looked me up and down the moment I stepped through the doorway of Emily's apartment. His eyes swept from my salt and pepper hair down to my worn shoes, lingering just long enough to turn silence into an insult unspoken. "So, you're Emily's father," he said, his tone flat, the disdain dripping even without words. Just as she described a typical suburban retiree clinging to old traditions. I extended my hand, determined to keep the civility intact. "It's good to finally meet you, Richard." But he ignored me completely. My hand hovered in the air, abandoned. That emptiness chilled the room by several degrees. Instead, Richard pulled Emily close, his arm cinched around her waist like a man staking a claim. My daughter's cheeks flushed crimson as she tried to ease the tension. Her voice quivered slightly, and her smile felt like a thin coat of paint stretched over cracks. "Dad, come in. Dinner's almost ready." The brightness in her tone was the same forced cheer I remembered from her childhood, the one she used whenever she had broken something fragile and wanted me not to notice. Richard had already claimed my spot, the blue armchair by the window where I always sat during visits. He leaned back, one leg crossed leisurely over the other, polished shoes perched on the edge of the chair as if he were an owner inspecting newly acquired property. His expensive watch caught the light, glittering as he gestured dismissively around the room. "These old furnishings," he scoffed, shaking his head. "Darling, after the wedding, we'll need something more modern." From the kitchen counter, Ethan looked up from his homework. At 15, the boy had always been perceptive beyond his years. His gaze met mine with silent understanding. "Dad likes that chair," he murmured. Richard's laugh was sharp, cutting through the room. "Well, Dad will have to get used to changes. That's what happens when families grow." Emily bustled around the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she carried the plates. The apartment felt smaller with every word Richard dropped, each remark a weight pressing the walls inward, squeezing the warmth out of the space I once found so inviting. Outside the window, Denver's skyline glittered beneath the fading February sun, but inside, the light had dimmed. "So, Frank," Richard finally asked, voice dripping with mock curiosity, "you're still in that house, aren't you? Same neighborhood for how long now? 20 years? 32? I kept my tone steady. "Yes." He smirked knowingly. "Stubborn. Emily said you never liked change." My daughter shot him a warning glance, but the damage had already been done. I could see it in her eyes. This introduction was not unfolding the way she had hoped. The spark of optimism that had flickered when I first arrived was fading fast. At dinner, Richard dominated the table. He spoke endlessly, his voice smooth but hollow, as though the entire room were his private stage, and we the unwilling audience. When Emily tried to highlight Ethan's recent academic achievements, Richard steered the conversation back to himself. "The boy needs more discipline," he declared, without looking at him. "Kids today lack structure. In my time we learned respect." Ethan's fork halted halfway to his mouth. His eyes darkened, the utensil trembling faintly in his hand. He said nothing, only pressed his lips together until a thin line of blood appeared. Emily's knuckles whitened as she gripped her glass of water too tightly. "He's a good kid," I said firmly, my voice steady as stone. Richard's smile didn't falter. "Of course you'd say that. Grandfathers always see the world through rose-colored lenses." By 8:30, I had gathered enough red flags to fill an entire notebook. The way he spoke to Emily as though she were simple, the constant stream of criticisms, from her cooking to the apartment itself, the utter disregard for Ethan, whom he acknowledged only to undermine. I rose slowly, slipping on my coat. Each movement was measured, deliberate, an attempt to mask the anger coursing through me. Yet my fingers shook as I fastened the buttons, betraying what I fought to conceal. "Thank you for dinner, Emily." She walked me to the door, her brow furrowed deeply with worry. "Dad, I know Richard can seem different. Everyone shows different sides of themselves. Please, give it time." I leaned down to kiss her cheek. But over her shoulder, Richard was watching from the armchair, eyes narrowed, lips curling into a razor-thin smile. It was the look of a predator satisfied with marking his territory, certain he had already won. The elevator descended in silence. In the parking garage, I sat motionless behind the wheel, the engine idling, headlights of passing cars bleeding red across my windshield and reflecting back a face tightened by worry. My hands clamped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Every heartbeat pounded like a hammer inside my chest. I needed to warn Emily. But how do you tell your daughter that the happiness she clings to is built on sinking sand without becoming her enemy? That night, sleep visited briefly only to abandon me, leaving me awake and staring at the dark ceiling. Each time my eyelids drifted shut, Richard Collins's smirk returned the curl of his mouth as he refused my handshake, as though daring me to oppose him. By dawn, I stumbled into the kitchen, hands trembling as I fumbled with the coffee pot. At 7 o'clock sharp, the phone rang. Emily's voice was taut, vibrating with the kind of tension I knew too well. "Dad, I need to come over. We have to talk." Anger surged up, almost uncontainable. She was coming to defend him. 40 minutes later, she stood in the doorway of my kitchen. She refused the chair I had pulled out for her. Her work clothes were rumpled, as if she had picked them up from the floor. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes. Her hair hung loose, tangled, as though she hadn't slept. "You hate him," she burst out before I could even offer her coffee. Her shoulders trembled, one hand clutching the strap of her purse so tightly the knuckles blanched. "I can see it in your face." I carefully set the cup down. "Emily, there's something about Richard Collins that doesn't sit right with me." There it is again. She paced the kitchen, back and forth between the counter and the window, her hands slicing the air. "Dad, you've always been like this. Remember how you poisoned me against Mark? You made me doubt everything, and it turned out he was completely fine." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "Mark cheated on you, Emily," I reminded her. "So what?" Her voice cracked like shattered glass. "At least he wasn't the monster you painted him to be. Richard is different. He loves me. I watched my daughter unravel. The early sunlight pierced through the window, laying harsh, cold streaks across her face, revealing every line of strain around her eyes. Outside, frost was melting in the garden, water dripping down the glass like silent tears. "You saw how he treated you last night," I pressed. "How did he treat me?" she snapped back, spinning on her heel. "He was nervous. Meeting you for the first time is terrifying, especially when the father in question has a reputation for driving away every man who dares come near his daughter." My hand found the familiar weight of the coffee mug. "I've never driven anyone away. Mark left because of his choices. Mark left because he was sleeping with his secretary. Stop twisting things." The explosion came. Her palm slammed down on the counter with a thunderous crack. Dishes rattled in the cupboard, a spoon clattered to the floor. "I won't let you ruin this for me, not again. Richard makes me feel wanted, desired. When was the last time you even asked me what I needed?" Her accusation cut through me like shards of porcelain. I thought of all the dinners she had skipped, the unanswered calls that went straight to voicemail, the way she had drifted further away from me since meeting Mark. "Emily, listen to yourself." "No, you listen!" she screamed, voice hoarse with anger. "When was the last time you saw me as a woman with the right to choose for herself? Or am I forever just the little girl you think you can control?" She snatched up her purse, the keys jangling together with a sharp metallic sting, like a blade slicing the air. "I'm 42 years old. I don't need your permission to love," Richard proposed. And I said yes. "You can either be happy for me, or you can keep your judgment to yourself." The words hit me like physical blows. I reached for her arm, but she yanked away. "I've made my choice, Dad. Now you make yours. Support me or lose me." The keys clinked again as she turned. The door slammed shut with a violence that shook the kitchen. The bitter scent of coffee lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating, while silence pressed in like a weight I could not lift. The front door slammed shut with a thunderous crack, the sound echoing like a clap of thunder through the still kitchen, making the window panes shiver and the china cups in the cabinet tremble. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the splinters of a fractured bond. The smell of scorched coffee hung heavy in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of the sink, filling every corner with a loneliness that pressed down like fog. My coffee had gone cold long ago. A thin film floated across the surface, lifeless and gray, as though even time itself had refused to share its warmth with me. The morning paper lay folded on the counter, untouched, irrelevant in the wreckage of the night. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked in frenzied bursts, then suddenly fell silent, leaving behind a stillness so unnatural it felt as though the entire street was pausing to listen to the heavy rhythm of my breathing. I dropped heavily into the chair Emily had refused only minutes earlier. Every wrinkle, every liver spot on my hand seemed to weigh more than ever, pulling me deeper into the cold seat. The silence was deafening, pressing against my eardrums as though I were diving too far underwater. She had been wrong about Mark. I had never poisoned her against him. I had only asked questions she didn't want to face. But when she finally discovered his affair, it was already too late. The damage was done. She no longer trusted my judgment. She no longer believed I wanted her happiness. And now here we were again. The same dance, only with a different partner. Except this time, she had placed an ultimatum squarely in my hands. Support Richard Collins or lose her forever. I lifted the cup of cold coffee, then set it back down untouched. The black surface reflected a face I hardly recognized. The hollow eyes looking back at me were those of a defeated man, a father who had lost his daughter not once, but twice. Once to a fraud, and once to his own unrelenting honesty. The morning stretched out before me, vast and empty like the kitchen itself. Pale light filtered through the blinds, slanting across the floor and staining it with streaks of dull gray, lengthening the sense of abandonment rather than offering comfort. I turned to the doorway, where my keys lay scattered from the night before. Picking them up, the cold metal bit into my skin like an unwelcome reminder that the world outside still spun forward while I remained trapped in this heavy silence. It was time to leave the suffocating house. Time to find a quiet place, somewhere to think. Time to remember how we had arrived at this precipice and whether there was still a way back. 20 minutes later, I found myself in City Park, lowering onto an old wooden bench whose peeling paint revealed deep grooves carved by time. The seat was icy, seeping into my back like a reminder that old age rarely shows mercy. Across the pond, ducks dove into the frigid water for their morning meal. Frost clung to the grass in silver patches, breaking apart into droplets that rolled down like shattered crystal under the pale February Sunday. For the first time since last night, my hands finally stopped trembling. 8 years. That was how long it had been since Emily's first marriage collapsed, since I'd stood by helplessly and watched her world cave in, all because I had been too polite to challenge the warning signs in Mark. My silence back then now echoed like a sentence passed on both of us. A silence that had delivered my daughter into the grip of a controlling man. She was 34 then, radiant and hopeful, clinging to love after a string of rebellious boyfriends who had tested my patience for years. Mark seemed different, respectable, an accountant with an office downtown, polished manners, a steady income. When he proposed after only 6 months, I remember feeling a guilty wave of relief. At least he wasn't reckless. At least she would be safe. But the cracks appeared quickly. At first they were whispers, subtle shifts. Mark would redirect Emily's attention whenever she spoke to another man, even a waiter or cashier. Then came the opinions about her friends. Sarah was too loud. Michelle drank too much. Karen filled her head with nonsense about feminism. Bit by bit, he trimmed her world smaller and smaller, peeling away her circle of support as though plucking petals from a flower. Soon, Emily stopped mentioning their names altogether. I tried asking careful questions. Haven't seen Sarah around lately. Everything all right? Emily would force a laugh, brittle and hollow, and brush it off. Oh, you know how busy life gets. Then she would change the subject, her smile stretched tight like a mask. By their first anniversary, Mark was choosing her outfits for business dinners, explaining that they needed to project the right image for his clients. He had moved them to a house in Littleton 40 minutes away from family and friends. Whenever I visited, he lingered, hovering, inserting himself into every conversation with his own interpretations. The breaking point came through Ethan, only 7 at the time. Over breakfast one morning, his small voice rang out with the clarity of a church bell. Mommy's friends from Daddy's office were here when you were gone. The truth spilled from innocence, impossible to ignore once heard. 2 nights later, I spotted Mark at a Cherry Creek bar with a young paralegal from his firm, no more than 26. They never noticed me in the corner, nursing a beer that turned bitter as lead on my tongue. His hand rested boldly on her thigh, the golden light of the bar catching the deceit in his smile. I watched them for 20 minutes, each second an indictment I wished I could unsee. Telling Emily felt like disarming a bomb. She erupted, accusing me of jealousy, of trying to control her, of sabotaging her happiness. But when she confronted Mark, his denials cracked under the weight of Ethan's innocent questions about the pretty blonde lady who brought cookies. The divorce dragged on for 8 brutal months. Every time she walked out of the courthouse, Emily looked older, hollower, as though each hearing shaved years off her spirit. Ethan, once bright-eyed, curled into nightmares, calling out for his mother in sobs that shattered the night. I stayed, piece by piece, helping them rebuild until laughter began to return. Yet Emily never forgave me for being right. Being right had cost her trust. A jogger flashed past now, headphones sealing him in his own rhythm. His steps landed with simple certainty, left, right, left, right. I envied him. No family disputes, no fractured loyalties to navigate, just forward motion. Richard Collins's behavior last night mirrored Mark's with eerie precision. The same possessive stare, the same casual dismissals, the same way he positioned himself as Emily's interpreter and protector. But Richard was more polished, more dangerous, a predator who knew how to hide his teeth. And this time, Emily had drawn the line before I could. Support her or lose her. Behind me, a groundskeeper gathered branches broken by the night wind, sweeping them away as though they had never mattered. Family, I thought bitterly, did not clear so easily. Its fragments remained, rotting into resentment and regret. On the pond, the ducks had finished their dives and now circled lazily. A mother duck nudged her stragglers back to safety. From a distance, the gesture could look harsh, like forcing, but up close, it was survival. I wondered, was my love for Emily truly protection, or had it become another form of chain? My phone buzzed on the bench, the screen glowing in the gray chill. A short text from Ethan lit up like a flare in the fog. "Grandpa, can we talk? Something feels wrong about Richard." Smart boy, perhaps the sharpest of us all. I brushed frost from my coat and tossed the last of my breadcrumbs to the water. The ducks swarmed without hesitation, trusting whatever fell from above to be nourishment, not poison. It was time to listen, time to see what Ethan had noticed that the rest of us, blinded by desire and pride, had failed to recognize. I spent the afternoon in the backyard, trimming the bare rose bushes that clawed along the fence line. Each squeeze of the shears rang out, metal slicing through the cold air, and the branches snapped against the frozen ground with a brittle crack that reminded me of bones breaking. It was February in Denver time to cut the plants all the way back, stripping them to nothing, so that spring might one day coax new life from the frozen soil. The rhythm of the work steadied me, dulled the edge of the argument from that morning. With every branch that fell, I tried to cut through the tangle of thoughts crowding my mind. Around 3:30, a familiar thud broke the silence, the heavy slap of a backpack hitting the porch. It was a sound I'd heard for years, but today it echoed differently, like a signal knock on a door. My ally had arrived. Ethan came around the corner still in his school uniform, khakis and a navy polo that made him look younger than 15. He bent automatically to pick up a fallen twig, without needing to be asked. "Grandpa," he said softly, "Mom seemed really upset this morning." His fingers worried the strap of his backpack, twisting it tighter as though holding back something heavier than books. "Did you two fight about Richard?" "We did." I clipped another branch, watching it tumble into the growing pile. "She's defending her choice." Ethan held the branch steady for me while I worked, our old routine falling into place as easily as breathing. We had gardened together since he was barely big enough to hold a rake. "I don't like him either," Ethan blurted, his words rushing out in a burst that seemed rehearsed in silence all week. His shoulders tightened, his eyes flicked to the ground. "He acts strange when Mom isn't home." I froze halfway through a cut, the shears heavy in my grip. "What do you mean, strange?" "He goes through our stuff," Ethan whispered. "Not like someone curious, like someone looking for something. He stares at family photos too long, like he's memorizing them. And he's always texting someone when he thinks no one's watching." The shears sagged in my hand. "Anything else?" Ethan swallowed, his voice dropping even lower. "He has 2 phones, Grandpa. Who even needs 2 phones? Above us, a cardinal swooped down, its red plumage vivid against the gray sky. It landed on the fence post and gave a short, sharp call, shrill, almost angry. A warning from nature itself. "When did you notice all this?" I asked. "Last weekend," he said quickly. "Mom went shopping, and I was doing homework." Richard sat down at the kitchen table, going through her papers. "The bank statements, all those official envelopes she keeps stacked." When he saw me watching, he pretended he was tidying up. The sun dipped lower behind the Rockies, and the temperature dropped with it. I set the shears aside and gestured toward the house. "Come on, let's warm up with some hot chocolate." Inside, Ethan pulled his favorite mug from the cupboard, the Denver Broncos, one I'd given him 3 Christmases ago. I warmed milk on the stove while he perched at the counter, backpack unzipped, homework forgotten. The smell of cocoa drifted through the kitchen, a sweetness almost absurd against the weight of our conversation. "There's something else," Ethan said, wrapping both hands around the steaming mug when I placed it before him. His voice was firmer now, but his eyes were old. "He asked Mom about your house, how much it's worth, about your pension. Mom told him it wasn't his business, but he wouldn't let it go." I leaned against the counter, my own mug untouched, cooling. Did she seem bothered by it? Yes, Ethan said, but she covered it up, said he was just curious, that he cared about family. He sipped, then looked at me over the rim of the mug. But Grandpa, it doesn't feel right. It's like he's always acting, like he's reading from a script. Outside the kitchen window, the street lamps of Cherry Creek flickered on one by one, their yellow glow painting steady halos across the quiet neighborhood. Ordinary houses, ordinary families, ordinary problems. Yet here, across the counter from my grandson, I felt the weight of something extraordinary pressing down, something that could break all of us if ignored. Ethan, I said carefully, I need you to promise me something. He straightened, his fingers tightening around the Broncos mug. What is it? Don't let Richard know you've noticed. Keep doing your homework. Be polite, but keep your eyes open. Can you do that? Ethan nodded with a solemnity that didn't belong to 15 years. Will you tell Mom? He asked. Not yet, I admitted. For now, we watch. If you see more, I'll be the one to speak first. He drained his mug and packed his things, mentioning casually that he was sleeping over at his friend Marcus's house. I walked him to the door, watching his thin frame retreat down the sidewalk, the backpack bouncing on his shoulders like a burden too heavy for his age. From a distance, he looked like any other teenager heading for a Friday night of video games and pizza, but he wasn't. He was my ally now, my eyes and ears in a war I could not fight alone. I stood in the doorway until Ethan vanished around the corner, then closed the door against the February cold. The empty mug still sat on the counter, faint wisps of steam curling from mine. For the first time since Richard Collins entered Emily's life, I no longer felt completely powerless. For the first time, I had a partner. Not just a grandson, but the only pair of clear eyes left in this family. The house felt cavernous after Ethan left. Every sound stretched thin and magnified by silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, ordinary noises became echoes in a hollow structure, as if I were wandering an abandoned building rather than my own home. I carried our empty mugs to the sink and let the water run hotter than necessary. Steam clouded the kitchen, stinging my hands until the skin reddened, but I let it flow, as though scalding water could rinse away the anger lodged in my chest. At last, I set the mugs aside, unwilling to face the emptiness of the evening. At 8 o'clock, I found myself pacing the hallway. My steps pulled me toward the family photo gallery that lined the wall, a frozen timeline of brighter years. Each frame hung like a silent witness, each image both memory and indictment. Emily at 5, mouth wide open in a joyous grin on her first day of school. Emily at 18, in cap and gown, eyes sparkling with the whole world ahead of her. Emily at 26, radiant in her first wedding dress. Mark beamed beside her as if he had just won the lottery. I remember the pride that swelled in me that day, pride that now tastes of ash. Mark had seemed safe after the reckless artists and musicians she dated in New York. A stable accountant with an office downtown, polite manners, steady income. He looked responsible. I thought she had finally found a man who would steady her. How wrong I had been. I drifted into the living room and lowered myself into Margaret's old armchair. The cushions still held the faintest memory of her, though she had been gone 3 years now. Her voice rose in memory, gentle but unyielding. Frank, I know you want to protect her, but sometimes protecting too tightly is the same as destroying. Margaret had believed Emily was stronger than I gave her credit for. Maybe she was right once, but as I stared into the shadows of our home, I could not ignore how my daughter's judgment had grown weaker with time, not stronger. I busied myself with making tea, though I had no desire to drink it, boiling water, scooping loose leaves, adding honey ritual without purpose. Beyond the window, the neighbor's porch light flickered. In the yard, the pale gleam of raccoon eyes flashed from the bushes, glowing like predators waiting for a careless mistake. My chest tightened. They reminded me too much of Richard Collins, lurking, watching, waiting for a chance to strike. Ethan's words returned to me, over and over. 2 cell phones, sifting through financial documents, the probing questions about my house, my pension. It formed a pattern I knew all too well, The kind you see on crime investigation shows methodical, deliberate, predatory. Someone surveying a target, gathering intelligence, preparing for something larger. But then the doubt pressed in. What if I was wrong? What if Richard was simply awkward, curious about the family he hoped to marry into? What if my suspicion was just the echo of old mistakes, the same mistrust that made me hesitate with Mark? Was I merely a jealous old man, clinging to the center of my daughter's life, refusing to let another man share her happiness? I wandered into the room that had once been Emily's bedroom, now my office. Her high school photograph still hung on the wall, prom queen, debate team captain, soccer star. She had once stood fearless, ready to conquer the world. Now she bent herself to men who diminished her light. The contrast crushed me. On my nightstand, my phone sat silent. No missed calls. No apology for the words she hurled at me that morning. No bridge across the chasm Richard had dug between us. The logical move would be to call her, to apologize, to promise my support, to keep the peace, to stay in her life. But every time I pictured her face, Ethan's voice cut through his hushed whisper, as if afraid someone might be listening. Children often tell truths that adults bury under excuses. For a fleeting moment, I thought about hiring a private investigator, but the thought dissolved instantly. Emily would see it as the ultimate betrayal proof that her paranoid father was determined to control her life. I returned to the living room window, staring out at the street where Ethan had walked toward his friend's house. Porch lights glowed like small suns in the February dark, casting warm pockets of life into the cold. Through lit windows, I glimpsed silhouettes, families gathered around tables, talking about homework, television, ordinary days. The simplicity stung. Margaret's voice whispered again from memory, "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let them fall. Be ready to catch them, but don't rob them of the lesson." Perhaps that was what Emily needed. Space to discover Richard's true nature for herself. If I pressed harder, my judgment would overshadow hers, and she would cling to him more tightly out of defiance. If I withdrew, if I seemed to surrender, maybe Richard would grow overconfident, careless enough to expose himself. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11:30. Time for bed. Time to let the day settle into whatever wisdom sleep might bring. I switched off the lights and climbed the stairs. My decision was made. I would give Emily the distance she demanded. I would stop voicing suspicions. I would let Richard believe he had won, but I would not stop watching. Neither would Ethan. Sometimes love means stepping back, but it never means giving up. The week that followed taught me the strange gravity of strategic silence. I kept myself busy with ordinary errands, groceries, a stop at the library, coffee with a couple of old colleagues from the engineering firm, yet none of it felt ordinary. Every familiar ritual seemed slightly off-key, as if life were playing half a note flat. Emily didn't call. I didn't either. Ethan texted twice, once to say Richard Collins had been probing more about the family's finances, and once to report another hushed phone call taken out on the balcony. I replied with careful encouragement, "Keep watching, but stay safe." By Wednesday, the quiet became unbearable. That evening, Emily finally called, her voice level, almost neutral. "Dad, I was thinking maybe the three of us could have dinner Friday, start over." I knew what start over meant, everybody, except Richard, pretending my instincts were wrong. "Sounds good, honey. Where?" "Mountain View Diner, 7 o'clock. Mountain View was our place, the spot where I used to take Emily for birthday pancakes when she was little, where Ethan and I still shared waffles on sleepy Saturday mornings. Family ground. On Friday, I arrived 20 minutes early and chose a table along the back wall, good sightline to the door, room to breathe if the air got thin. The diner pulsed with weeknight life, the clink of knives and forks, the low thrum of conversation, the warm braid of seared meat and fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. But as I watched the entrance, it all seemed to siphon away, leaving only the thud of my heartbeat when they finally stepped inside. Richard walked as if the linoleum were his stage, his palm, a shade too firm at the small of Emily's back, an affectionate gesture tightened into a brand of possession. "Frank, good to see you again," he said, extending his hand. His fingers clamped down and pulled, turning a greeting into a small, silent tug of war. I didn't pull back, but a chill crept into my bones all the same. Emily slid into the booth between us, shoulders squared, hands hidden beneath the table as if she were balancing on a wire. Richard fanned his menu with theatrical ease. "Let's order the best thing they've got." I kept my voice level. "Here, the meatballs have never let me down. For 20 years, same good taste." He smirked, skimming the plastic pages as though the list itself were some shabby joke. "Charming. Emily, the salmon?" She nodded too quickly. Betty, who'd worked here since Emily was in grade school, set water glasses down and gave me a brief, knowing look, the kind that says, "I see you trying to hold a family together with your bare hands." Richard ordered the priciest entree without hesitation, and a bottle of wine the diner didn't carry, then sighed audibly when Betty pointed to their short list. Emily asked for soup, murmuring she wasn't very hungry. I kept to the meatballs, a small act of loyalty to the past. Emily tried to steer the talk toward wedding plans, bright but brittle. Richard seized it like a baton. "Just the venue is $12,000, he announced, voice pitched for nearby tables to overhear. "Add catering, flowers, photography, we're looking at a minimum of $30,000 for a proper celebration." The number hit the tabletop like a weight. Somewhere behind me, a spoon clattered on tile, a tiny clock striking alarm. He went on smoothly. "Emily's salary at the marketing firm is decent, but a woman should feel like a princess on her big day." Color rose in Emily's cheeks. "Richard, we talked about keeping it simple." "Nonsense," he said, loud enough to ripple across 3 booths. "I won't have my bride cutting corners." Then he pivoted, smile gleaming. "Frank, Emily tells me you're comfortable. Pensions, savings. Surely you'd want your only daughter to have a day worth remembering." Classic public pressure play. Invoke Emily's happiness, float assumptions about my finances, box me in with an audience. Conversation around us thinned. Betty reappeared, hovering like a buffer. "Everything all right? Ready to order?" We were already captured in Richard's little theater, and he knew it. I stared at the steam lifting from my coffee. "I owe you nothing," I thought. Out loud, I said nothing at all. For a heartbeat, Richard's veneer slipped, his eyes went flat and calculating, no lover's warmth in them, only numbers and angles. Then the charming mask slid neatly back into place. "Emily, your father's not one of those men who can't bear another man providing for his daughter, is he?" Emily's napkin twisted tighter in her lap, the fabric crumpling in her fist until her knuckles blanched. She nodded anyway, a machine obeying its program. I glanced at the window. Beyond the glass, Denver's winter skyline glittered against the February dark. Far beyond the city, the mountains stood patient and unswayed, witnesses to 1,000 small human tragedies unfolding in their shadow. I thought of Margaret, of what she would have done, of the trembling line between love and permission, protection and control. When our food arrived, I heard my own voice as if from down a long hallway. "All right, I'll help with the wedding costs." Richard's victorious smile snapped into place, too quick, too bright. Emily reached across and squeezed my hand, warmth mixed with a tremor she couldn't quite hide. "Thank you, Dad. It means the world." Richard launched into a monologue about open bars and a string quartet, about floral arches and photo booths. Betty topped off my coffee without a word. I studied Emily's face. Her smile widened with every plan he listed, but her eyes never cleared. They were clouded, distant, as if she'd just sold a small piece of her soul for the promise of a peaceful evening. The month that stretched between that fraught dinner at Mountain View and the day of Emily's wedding moved with the heaviness of a glacier splitting apart, slow, unstoppable, every creak in its surface, a reminder that collapse was inevitable. No one could halt it. All we could do was brace for the crash. I held my distance, exactly as I had promised, watching from the margins while Richard Collins choreographed what he proudly called the perfect celebration. The Rocky Peak venue perched high above Denver, like a palace of glass. Massive windows caught the February sunsets and refracted them until the entire hall shimmered as though encased in crystal. Guests gasped at the view, but to me it looked more like a fortress, a gleaming stronghold where Richard had built his kingdom. Emily had dreamed of this place since she was 12 years old. I remembered her hunched over at the kitchen table, scissors in hand, clipping glossy photos of bridal gowns and mountain venues from magazines, pasting them into a scrapbook she guarded like treasure. Now here she was, descending the aisle with a radiance that stunned the room. Her gown swept the floor, catching light in a cascade of fractured brilliance, each sparkle a fragment of the girl who once whispered wishes into paper. For a moment, my chest ached with something close to surrender. In her eyes I saw absolute faith, the kind of faith I had not been able to grant anyone since Margaret's death. My heart pulled in two directions, one half yearning to believe alongside her, the other half clawing to shout a warning. The ceremony unfolded in a blur of string music and camera flashes. Guests leaned toward one another, murmuring admiration, but for me, all sound dulled into a steady tick, like the second hand of a clock hammering in my mind. When will the mask crack? Richard played his part flawlessly, dutiful groom, accomplished businessman, the man who had supposedly captured Emily's heart. Only I seemed to notice that his smile never reached his eyes. They scanned the crowd not with pride, but with calculation, like a merchant tallying spoils. I nearly convinced myself I was wrong. Nearly. In that haze of vows and applause, I wondered if perhaps I was just a weary old man, suspicious of every shadow, too scarred by the past to recognize genuine devotion. But the unease never left. It only retreated, coiling tight in my ribs. When the ceremony closed, relief swept through me like air after surfacing from deep water. I thought the hardest stretch was behind us. I was mistaken. The true peril, the unraveling of Richard's carefully stitched persona, was waiting in the reception hall. That was where his real nature would step into the light. My assigned seat said everything before the evening even began. The card with the number 12 set me at a table half hidden behind a column, far from the glow of the chandeliers. A place close enough to count as present, yet far enough to reduce me to a spectator in my own daughter's wedding. At the head table, Richard Collins sat squarely in the center, the way a king might settle into his throne. His laughter boomed above the music, each gesture designed to draw every eye. Beside him, Emily smiled too often, her expression thin and forced as she tried to pull others into the orbit of what she still believed was joy. Then Richard rose, champagne flute raised high. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed across the hall, silencing forks midair. "I want to thank all of you for joining Emily and me tonight." Faces turned toward him with expectation. Emily beamed at her new husband, radiant in her role. "A special thanks," Richard continued, pausing just long enough to let tension build, "to those who believed in our love from the very beginning." His eyes slid deliberately toward my corner of the room. Some said we were moving too fast, that love at our age was foolish. His words sliced the air like a blade aimed directly at me. I felt my jaw clench, heat spreading in my chest. Around me, Emily's co-workers shifted uneasily in their seats, clearly sensing the undercurrent. Richard pressed on. "But Emily and I knew when you know no matter what the doubters might think." Then his gaze locked onto mine across the crowded hall. "This is about new beginnings, and leaving old judgments behind." Polite applause trickled through the room, thin and uneven. Even from my distant table, I could see Emily's smile tremble, her eyes darting toward me with an unspoken apology before she turned back, resuming her performance as the blissful bride. A chair scraped softly beside me. Ethan slid in, his 15-year-old frame folding into the empty seat at my side. He touched my arm under the table, steady and discreet. "You okay, Grandpa?" he whispered. "I'm fine," I muttered, tugging at my tie. But I wasn't. The silk felt like a noose cinched tighter with every word Richard spoke, every calculated glance he threw my way. I watched as he paraded Emily onto the dance floor. He twirled her with the confidence of a director showcasing his masterpiece, not a husband cherishing his wife. His steps were sharp, commanding. Emily moved with him, but her body carried a stiffness that betrayed unease. What unsettled me most, however, was not Richard, but the men who had come with him. 3 figures in tailored black suits and dark ties clustered at the edge of the room. They neither laughed nor joined the drinking. Their conversation was clipped, their attention wandering back to Emily with the kind of look that froze the blood in my veins. They didn't resemble old college friends or business partners. They looked like men accustomed to operating in the shadows. The music played on. Laughter swirled through the air. Glasses clinked in toasts, but beneath it all I felt the undercurrent shift. A current of menace, subtle yet undeniable. Ethan sensed it too. His shoulders stiffened beside me. That night, amid the celebration, the reception hall became something else. Not a gathering of joy, but a theater of humiliation, manipulation, and hidden threat. And only Ethan and I seemed to realize the play we were truly watching. "May I have this dance?" Richard Collins's voice carried across the hall as the band struck up the song they had chosen for their first dance. Emily tilted her head onto his shoulder, smiling softly as if she were in the center of a dream. Yet even as he guided her in practiced steps, his eyes cut straight through me, cold, sharp, predatory, like the edge of a blade. Beside me, Ethan's hand clamped onto mine, his grip so tight it blanched his knuckles. "Grandpa, I need some air. It's too stifling in here." His voice trembled, not like a teenager making excuses to escape the noise, but like a young soldier who had spotted the enemy beyond the line. I watched him weave between tables, his pale face stark beneath the golden light of the reception hall. The dance ended in a flourish. Richard spun Emily out, dipped her low, then raised her back with theatrical precision, basking in the applause like a performer living for the ovation. But when I turned back toward the terrace doors, Ethan was gone. Moments later, he burst back into the hall as though he had seen a ghost. His tie was askew, sweat glistening on his forehead, eyes wide with raw terror. He pushed through the crowd until he reached me, chest heaving, words spilling out like alarm bells. "Grandpa, we have to stop this wedding right now." I rose at once, steadying him by the shoulders. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" His reply came in a broken whisper that hit like a cannon blast. "His real name is William Harrison." My heartbeat thundered. Each word dropped like iron bolts, sealing a door I had hoped never to open. Ethan's voice cracked with urgency. "He's a criminal. I heard him outside with those men bragging, laughing, talking about how he's done this before." I froze. "No, that can't be." Ethan's eyes widened further, shining with dread. "He said he'd taken everything from wives before, in Phoenix, in Seattle. He marries them, strips them bare, and disappears. That's who he is, Grandpa. That's who he is." All around us, the reception played on a festive symphony masking disaster. Glasses clinked in cheerful rhythm, laughter burst in bright waves, and the band slid into another romantic ballad. Yet it all rang hollow, a merry facade hiding the machinery of ruin. I forced the words out. "Are you absolutely certain about what you heard?" Ethan nodded hard, breath coming in quick bursts. "I stepped outside because it was hot. Those men he came with were smoking by the planters. Richard joined them, and I heard him say it himself. William Harrison has 3 arrest warrants, but Richard Collins is clean as a saint." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. My legs shook as I clung to the back of a chair for balance. "What else?" I managed. Ethan swallowed. "They were talking about the honeymoon. About how Mom keeps all her banking information in her purse. About draining her accounts once they got to Mexico, and one of them asked about your money." His voice broke. "They meant you, Grandpa. Richard told them that once the marriage was sealed, he'd have access to everything." The pieces slid into place with horrifying clarity. His probing questions about my pension, the fixation on the value of my home, his insistence on an extravagant wedding funded by me. None of it was coincidence. It was a con meticulously staged, and I had watched it unfold step by step. Across the hall, Emily stood with Richard at the cake table, his hand resting firmly over hers as they cut the first slice. She giggled when he dabbed frosting onto her cheek, the photographers capturing every frame of counterfeit joy. But to me, it was agony, my daughter, slicing not just cake but her future, handing half of it to a man who meant to devour her whole. Ethan's voice pulled me back. "We have to tell her, right now, before they leave tomorrow." I stared at my grandson, his young face carved with an intensity far older than his years. He was right, but the question gnawed at me. How could I shatter a bride's wedding night with the truth that her husband was a predator in disguise? My eyes darted back to Richard. For the briefest moment, his gaze swept the room and landed on us. The mask slipped. The charm vanished, replaced by the cold glint of a hunter who sensed prey stirring too close to freedom. "He's watching us," I muttered. "Yes," Ethan breathed, his voice steady despite the fear. "He always is. He listens to everything. What do we do now, Grandpa? Mom won't believe us without proof." Richard bent down, whispering something into Emily's ear. She glanced toward us, worry clouding her face. Then Richard began to move, his smile rekindled, bright and dazzling for the crowd, but I saw the steel beneath it. "Frank, Ethan," his voice rang out across the reception, warm to the untrained ear but edged with command. "Come join us for cake. A family should share these moments together." The words carried the weight of a leash snapping tight. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order, dragging us back into his orbit before suspicion could flare into action. Around us, the guests clapped, oblivious, raising glasses in celebration. But I felt the net cinching shut, each strand woven tighter. Emily stood in its center, radiant and unaware, and time was slipping away before the trap closed completely. All around us, the reception buzzed with the trappings of joy, clinking spoons against glasses, bursts of laughter, the soft sway of a jazz trio filling the air. Yet to me, it all felt hollow. Nothing more than the false backdrop of a horror film where the monster is already in the room. Richard Collins began his approach. His stride was deliberate, shoulders pitched slightly forward, eyes locked onto us with predatory focus. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. Each step closed the distance like a wolf circling in, tightening the perimeter around its prey. I measured the time 30 seconds, maybe less before he reached our table. 30 seconds that stretched longer than 30 years. My heartbeat pounded in my ears like the ticking of a doomsday clock, each beat counting down to the inevitable collision. I leaned closer to Ethan, whispering with urgency. "Sit tall. Take a deep breath. Remember, we're actors now. Don't let him see the fear in your eyes." Ethan nodded, fumbling to straighten his tie. He forced a smile, but his lips trembled, a fragile mask barely holding. His hands, resting on the table, shook as though the weight of his secret were more than his 15-year-old frame could bear. He looked like a child trying to hide a failing report card, but the truth he carried was no grade on a page. It was dynamite that could either save Emily or destroy her entirely. I clenched my jaw. 68 years of life, and here I was with only seconds to decide whether to play this hand or to keep the card hidden beneath the table. Richard's grin widened as he closed in. The chandelier light fractured across his teeth, white and gleaming yet devoid of warmth. It was not the smile of a groom basking in celebration. It was the polished smirk of a man staking his claim, the opening move of someone accustomed to domination. And with every step he took, the mask of festivity slipped further, revealing the predator beneath. "Ah, there's my dear in-laws." Richard Collins leaned in just close enough that the harsh bite of his cologne eclipsed the buttercream from the cake. His smile cracked like flaking paint. "Emily worried you looked lonely over here." Behind him, Emily approached with dessert plates, her gown whispering against chair backs. The plates trembled, flatware clicked together, her smile splitting into a hairline fissure. I rose, steering the chatter with Ethan toward the old days, as if teenagers adored family history. Richard seized my hand and held it too long. My knuckles gave a faint crack. It wasn't a greeting, it was a territorial test. His eyes searched my face for doubt. "Best to leave the past in the ground," he said, gaze pinning me. "Otherwise it has a way of clawing back up at the worst possible time." Warning delivered with a grin while the reception swirled around us. "Dad, you look pale. Are you okay?" Emily asked, the concern real, the glow still on her face. Just tired, sweetheart. Big day, I said. But I wasn't tired, I was afraid. Every minute Richard remained. Emily's husband was a minute of lawful access to her life, her accounts, her trust. Ethan's revelation had turned the reception into a countdown. Actually, I said, lowering my voice, spacing my breath so each word fell like ash, I was hoping for a few minutes with you. Nothing serious. I just want to tell you how proud your mother would be today. Richard's thumb pressed into the silk at Emily's waist, a small, brutal anchor. So sweet, he purred. But Emily's been on her feet, greeting guests all day. Family moments can wait. Dad, he's right. I should get back, Emily said, apologetic but firm. We can talk tomorrow before the flight. Tomorrow would be too late. By then they would be bound for Mexico, where Richard could disappear with her money, leaving her stranded with a stranger's name and no safety net. Please, I said. Something in my tone punctured the spell of the night. Emily paused and, for the first time all evening, really looked at me. What kind of important? Richard drew her closer. Your father's had a long day, love. He's confused. I'm not confused, I said, meeting Richard's eyes. And neither is Ethan. At Ethan's name, Richard's mask slipped clean off. For a heartbeat I saw the thing beneath. Cold, calculating, dangerous. The politician's smile snapped back into place too late. Emily had seen it too. What does Ethan have to do with this? She asked, a new unease sharpening her voice. 5 minutes, I said. Give me 5 minutes in private and I'll explain everything. Absolutely not, Richard cut in, stepping between us. Emily, your father has tried to sabotage us from day one. Don't let him poison your wedding with more delusions. Let him talk, Emily said, then louder, steadier. Richard, let him talk. His jaw knotted. A plan somewhere in him took on water. Emily followed me into the small ready room. The door clicked shut. Reception laughter drifted in thin and mocking. The space smelled of hairspray, powder, clipped stems. Flat fluorescent light washed the color out of everything, as if we'd stepped into an interrogation booth. Hurry, Dad, Emily said, checking her watch. Every little gesture shouted impatience. People will notice I'm gone. Ethan overheard something terrible about Richard, I said. Her face hardened. Not today, not on my wedding day. His real name is William Harrison, I said. He's wanted by the FBI. Stop. Her voice shattered like glass. You're jealous because I found someone who makes me happy. This is exactly what you did with Mark, and he was weak, not a criminal. I took out my phone and typed what Ethan had given me. The screen flared, then click the mugshot snapped into being. The same charming smile, caged now in the hard square of a booking photo, a gun barrel aimed at us. Emily's chin dropped as if a cord had been cut, her shoulders buckled, the crystal headpiece shivering out of rhythm. Beneath the image, headlines knifed forward. Widow in Phoenix cleaned out. Seattle teacher snared by marriage fraudster. FBI expands hunt for Harrison, allegedly targets single mothers. Her fingers loosened. The phone clattered on the hardwood. In an instant, her gown stopped being a dream and became a costume, ornate satin for a play where she was the only actor who hadn't read the script. Oh God, she whispered. It's him. What have I done? I moved closer, uncertain if comfort would be welcome. Emily, this isn't your fault. He's a professional criminal. This is his job. I defended him against you. I made you pay for our wedding. Black mascara tracked her cheeks like war paint. I chose a criminal over my father. The mountains beyond the window held their ancient breath. What if he runs? She said. What if he knows we know? What if he hurts someone? I dropped to one knee, taking her trembling hands in mine and in my own shaking grip. We're calling the police now. He's not going to hurt anyone else. For a heartbeat she was my little girl again, the child who fled to me when nightmares stole her sleep. I'm sorry I didn't listen, she whispered. And I'm grateful you're listening now, I said, passing her the handkerchief Margaret had stitched my initials into 20 years ago. It was enough. Emily blotted her tears, then sat taller, wearing the stubborn set of her mouth I remembered from scraped-knee bicycle lessons. What do we do when we go back out? We act normal. We wait for help. I dialed 911 and gave the dispatcher the facts. Wanted fugitive, active wedding, Rocky Peaks venue. Units are en route, came the dry reply. ETA, 15 to 20. The number dropped into the room like a lump of lead. Emily faced the mirror. She reset a smudged edge of liner, practiced the curve of a composed smile once, twice until it held. The frightened bride was gone. A survivor stared back. Then we should get back before he comes looking, she said. She leaned into my shoulder. The memory rose unbidden of the night her pet hamster died, and I carried her down the dark hall while she cried into my collar. Some things never change between a father and a daughter. He fooled everyone, sweetheart, I said. That's what professionals do, but you saw through him the second you needed to. She drew back, surprise and regret in her eyes. Why didn't I trust my gut? Because you had to make your own choice. That's how we grow up. She glanced down at the extravagant dress and let out a brittle laugh. Some choice. I married a wanted felon. We can fix this, I said, but we have to move before he senses anything's wrong. When will the police get here? 15 minutes, maybe 20. Can I keep it together that long? You have to. And she could. I saw the steel that had carried her through single motherhood, through a career that demanded more than it gave. What's our cover if people ask why we were gone? Wardrobe glitch, I said, snagged zipper. And stay on the left side of the glass doors, the reflections will show us which way he's coming. And Ethan? We stick to him like needle and thread. If anything turns strange, head straight to the DJ and tell them to flood the room with light. Emily scrolled once more through the case summaries. He targets recently divorced women with assets. Fast love, faster proposals. That's exactly what he did to me. Enough reading, I said gently. It will only hurt. No, she said, voice strengthening with each new shard of truth. I need to know everything we almost let happen. The widow in Phoenix lost her home, her retirement, the kids' college fund. That could have been me. Then let it be your warning, not your burden, I said. She lifted her chin. Her eyes were dry now, her voice crisp. He stole my wedding. He doesn't get my life. Good. One more thing, I said. If anyone asks, you were fixing a snag. And remember, stand where you can see the doors. She squeezed my hand. Let's protect Ethan. We will. Emily squared her shoulders, smoothed the gown one last time. All right, she said. We go out there and pretend everything is fine while we wait for the FBI to arrest my husband. The door swung open, the saxophone rushed in. We stepped out like actors between scenes, carrying a secret heavy as an iceberg beneath the dance floor. We're calling the police now. He won't hurt anyone else. Emily looked up at me through wet lashes, and for a heartbeat I saw my little girl again, the child who ran to me when nightmares stole her sleep. I'm sorry I didn't listen, she whispered. You listened when it mattered. I pressed Margaret's hand-stitched handkerchief into her palm. A hint of lavender still clung to the threads, as if Margaret herself had stepped back into the room to stand with us. Emily dabbed at her face. Black mascara streaked her fingers like spilled ink on a bad contract. Then she drew herself upright in the chair with the old stubborn resolve I'd known since skin-knee bicycle lessons. What do we do when we go back out there? We act normal, I said. We wait for help. I dialed 911. Each beep while the call connected sounded like a clock, hand clicking forward. Wanted fugitive at a wedding reception, Rocky Peaks. Richard Collins, alias William Harrison. The dispatcher's voice was crisp, steady. Stay calm. Units dispatched. I ended the call. How long? Emily asked. Estimated arrival in 15 to 20, I said. The phrase fell into the room like lead. 20 minutes stretched out like a lifetime. Each tick of the second hand hammered my ribs. Emily stood, faced the mirror, and steadied her breathing. She twisted the lipstick, tracing color back onto trembling lips, stroke by careful stroke, building a borrowed suit of armor. In the glass, the terrified bride evaporated. A survivor stared back. Then we should get out there before he comes looking, she said. She leaned briefly against my shoulder, and the old memory flashed, her 7-year-old hand clutching mine at the tiny graveside of a hamster, our breath misting in the autumn air. Some things between a father and daughter never change. He fooled everyone, sweetheart, I said. That's the tradecraft of a professional, but you saw him clearly the moment it counted. She stepped back, surprise and regret crossing her face. Why didn't I trust my gut? Because you had to make your own choice. That's what growing up is. She let out a brittle laugh, touching the extravagant dress. Some choice. I married a wanted felon. We can fix this, I said, firm. But we have to move before he senses anything's wrong. She nodded, blotting her cheeks with Margaret's handkerchief. The police, when will they actually be here? 15, maybe 20 minutes. Can you hold it together that long? I have to. I watched the steel return to her spine, the same steel that carried her through single motherhood and a career that took more than it gave. What's our story if anyone asks where we went? She said. Wardrobe snag or your dad needed blood pressure meds, I said. Small, believable problems, good excuses to hide an earthquake. She stared at her phone. Richard's glossy grin glared back from the mugshot. What if he bolts the moment the police arrive? Then they handle it. That's their job. And his friends, the 3 men in the suits? I've wondered the same. We stay close to Ethan. Keep him safe. Emily scrolled through the case blurbs again. Listen. He targets recently divorced women with assets. Fast romance, faster proposals, that's exactly what he did to me. Enough reading, I said gently. It will only make you bleed. No, she said, voice gaining iron with each line. I need to see what we almost let happen. She read. A teacher in Seattle wrote, he promised to be a good stepfather. Instead, I lost my home and my job. Emily bit her lip hard enough to beat a line of red but didn't put the phone down. Outside the door, a saxophone phrase floated past, every note falling like a thin, mocking blade. I pictured Richard sprinting for an exit, smirking, a suitcase of cash ghosting behind him. My chest cinched. Here's the plan, I said. If anyone asks, it was a ripped seam or a quick pill for me. Stay to the left of the glass doors, use the reflections to see him coming. We stick to Ethan like needle and thread. If anything turns strange, go straight to the DJ and tell them to flood the room with light. Emily lifted her chin. The woman in the mirror was no longer a bride but a combatant. Her eyes had dried into sharp edges. I took her hand cold as riverstone and felt, beneath the chill, the same small warmth I'd felt when she was 7 and needed me to anchor her in a storm. How am I supposed to look at him like nothing's wrong? She asked. You've done it all day, I said softly. Just 20 minutes more. She squared her shoulders. The gown rustled like a blade leaving its sheath. All right, she breathed. We perform until the stage collapses. And together we reached for the door. Remember, he's a master at reading people. Don't give him reason to doubt. Emily pushed the door open. The hinges gave a faint, eerie creak that in my ears sounded deafening, like a signal flare announcing something was about to shatter. We stepped back into the reception hall. Laughter, glasses clinking, the band's jaunty notes, all of it carried on as if nothing in the world was wrong. The chandeliers above glittered, scattering light across Emily's wedding gown, turning her into the centerpiece of a stage. But I knew this wasn't a stage for love. It was the final act of a con man's play. There's my beautiful bride, Richard Collins called across the room, his voice wrapping itself around the crowd like silk. Emily smiled, light and easy. Just freshening up, she said, smoothing the folds of her dress. You know how these old gowns can be. He slid his arm around her waist with a possessiveness too sharp to be affectionate, his thumb pressing into the fabric at her side like a stamp of ownership. Emily stiffened for the briefest second, then summoned a flawless, artificial smile. Her eyes flicked toward me, just a flash, but enough to say, "Stay in character." Richard's gaze swept over me, cold and exacting, as though he carried X-ray vision. He was hunting for a tremor, a flicker of fear, any sign that his carefully spun web had been pierced. "Your father looks tired," he remarked, voice honey-sweet but with a razor edge hidden inside. The crowd laughed lightly at whatever joke he had told seconds before, but his words were meant only for us. "I'm fine," I said, forcing my head to nod. My pulse thundered like war drums beneath my ribs. Every muscle in my face worked overtime to hold a mask of calm. Emily placed her hand over his, a gentle gesture that disguised her tension. Her tone was steady, almost defiant. "He's fine." All around us, celebration raged on, glasses chiming, forks scraping plates, the sugary scent of wedding cake wafting through the air. None of it matched the truth Emily and I carried back from the preparation room. In the pocket of my vest, my phone buzzed. The vibration was subtle, but to me it matched the hammering of my heart. I risked a glance. One line glowed on the screen: "Units en route. Stay calm." Cold words, but they were our only lifeline. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked forward, each second snapping like the click of a gun being cocked. 20 minutes, maybe less, until the room would erupt. Richard turned smoothly, steering Emily toward the dance floor again, but his eyes never left me. The smile on his lips was warm enough for the guests, but to me it was the stare of a hunter who knew the trap had already closed. 20 minutes of pretending stretched into 20 hours of torment. Every slow song from the band felt elongated, each burst of laughter in the hall warped into distant echoes. Emily carried her role flawlessly, dancing with Richard Collins, cutting the cake, receiving congratulations from guests who had no idea they were celebrating a lie. I felt each handshake, each toast, like tiny needles pressing into my palms, painful reminders that I had to keep acting, no matter how suffocating the charade became. Ethan slipped into place beside me during one of the slower songs. His hand brushed against mine under the table, a small touch but one that transferred courage. He whispered, voice trembling yet steady, "Grandpa, is it happening soon?" "Very soon," I murmured back, squeezing his shoulder. "You've saved your mother tonight." Through the tall glass windows of Rocky Peaks, I caught sight of the first patrol car sliding silently into the parking lot. No lights, no sirens, just a dark silhouette moving with surgical precision. They arrived like a blade cutting through the chaos, quiet, exact, and unyielding. Emily saw them too. Her smile never faltered, but I caught the faintest nod from her across the room. 2 uniformed officers entered through the main doors, their stride confident, their eyes sharp. They moved like men who had rehearsed this scene countless times. The lead officer stopped at our family's table, where Richard was spinning another story of his business triumphs. "Excuse me, sir," the officer said politely but firmly. "Are you Richard Collins?" "That's me." Richard's politician's smile glowed under the chandelier. "Officers, is everything all right? I hope we haven't disturbed the neighbors with all this noise. We'd like a word in private, sir." "Of course, always happy to cooperate," Richard replied, still wearing his mask of charm. He followed them toward the entrance, posture relaxed, voice dripping with false civility. Yet the second officer stayed close, his hand hovering near his cuffs. They had done their homework. Near the doors, just far enough to keep guests from overhearing but close enough for me to see, the lead officer pulled out a tablet. With a swipe, the screen lit up and suddenly the music seemed to fade, as though the room itself was holding its breath. On the display glared a mugshot, newspaper headlines, and a list of indictments. The officer's voice rang clear. "William Harrison, you are under arrest for fraud and embezzlement across multiple states." Richard's grin froze. His eyes flickered with panic before he tried to paste the smile back on. For one fleeting second, the mask fell completely, his jaw tightened, his breath came sharp, and he stood exposed, not a groom, a fugitive. "You've got the wrong man. I'm Richard Collins. I was just married today." "We have your fingerprints from the wine glasses, sir. Multiple active warrants are waiting. Please place your hands behind your back." That was the moment his survival instinct snapped. Richard lunged toward the terrace doors. Guests screamed, scattering like startled birds. Champagne glasses crashing to the floor. Tablecloths jerked sideways as people rushed away. The second officer launched himself forward, tackling Richard before he could reach the door. Chairs skidded, fabric tore, the sharp metallic clink of cuffs rang out. In seconds, the fugitive lay face down on the polished floor, his expensive suit wrinkled and torn, his wrists locked tight behind his back. "You have the right to remain silent." As they hauled him upright, his eyes locked onto mine. Fury blazed there, hatred like burning coal. He thrashed against the cuffs, shouting over the stunned silence of the room. "You did this, old man. You destroyed everything. You'll pay for this." But around us, the air had shifted. Among the shocked faces of the guests, I saw something else, an almost imperceptible ripple of relief. The storm had been cut off before it could consume us all. The metallic snap of the cuffs echoed through the hall, final and merciless. Richard Collins thrashed, his voice rising in desperate threats, but the sound was no longer menacing. It was the hollow cry of a caged animal. His eyes darted wildly, searching for allies among the crowd, but all he met were cold, unfamiliar faces. And then Emily stepped forward. The chandeliers above caught her silver-white gown, making it shimmer like armor rather than a wedding dress. Her voice rang out steady and commanding, cutting through the stunned silence. "Listen carefully. The man I married tonight is a con artist, a criminal on the run. He planned to steal everything from me and vanish. If it weren't for my father and my son, this night would have ended as a nightmare with no escape." A collective gasp swept the hall. Some guests covered their mouths, others whispered frantically into phones, while a few simply stood frozen, trying to piece together the fragments of a truth too shocking to absorb. Phones lifted, the soft click of cameras punctuated the air, turning the reception into an impromptu courtroom. I placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, my voice breaking yet resolute. "If not for this boy, we would all have been deceived. He is the true hero tonight." Scattered applause rose, hesitant at first, then swelling into something undeniable. Ethan flushed red, bowing his head, but his eyes shone with a pride that was impossible to hide. Guests reached out to shake his hand, to thank him, to honor the courage he had shown when it mattered most. Meanwhile, Richard was dragged toward the exit. His shoes scraped across the polished wooden floor, a harsh sound of defeat. He strained against the cuffs, his body jerking, but the officers kept him pinned with practiced precision. The three shadowy associates who had haunted the edges of the evening were gone, slipping out through the back like smoke, leaving only empty chairs and the faint stench of cigarettes behind. Emily's face was calm, but her hands moved with fierce purpose. She pulled the wedding ring from her finger, held it up for all to see, then placed it firmly in the palm of a waiting officer. "This is not a symbol of love," she said. "It's evidence." The sharp clink of metal against the evidence pouch was louder than the music, louder than the murmurs of the guests, a cold full stop at the end of a fabricated story. And then, silence. The joyful music still trickled out from the speakers, oblivious, a cheerful melody that now felt bitterly ironic. Flowers, balloons, white linens, all the decorations that had glowed with promise an hour before, now hung limp, exposed as the stage dressing of a fraud. Ethan stepped closer, positioning himself between Emily and me. 3 generations stood together, bound by blood and survival, watching through the glass as the patrol car rolled away. The red and blue strobes flared across the dark parking lot, swallowing Richard's final curses behind bulletproof glass. Emily's hand clasped her son's, her other hand reaching instinctively for mine. And in that fragile but powerful triangle, I knew we had just fought and won a battle no one had asked for, but all of us had desperately needed. Emily still wore her crumpled wedding gown, her eyes red from tears yet carrying a new brightness. Her voice trembled, as if she was only half convinced that the nightmare had truly dissolved. "Has it really ended?" I tightened my arm around her shoulders, pulling Ethan close with my other hand. 3 trembling bodies, 3 heartbeats, sinking into one unbreakable circle. The faint perfume of her wedding blended with sweat and stage dust, chaotic yet strangely warm, the truest scent of family. Outside, the metallic slam of the patrol car's door echoed in my mind, a cold punctuation mark closing the darkest chapter of Emily's life. Some guests lingered on the porch, craning their necks to watch the car disappear down the mountain road, whispering to each other as if they had stumbled into a film they never intended to play a part in. Inside, the reception unraveled. Guests slipped off ties and heels, quietly gathering wilted bouquets and half-opened gifts, their eyes darting back toward us with a mixture of sympathy and reverence. The music had long since stopped, leaving only the clatter of staff clearing dishes, the last traces of a celebration that had turned into a courtroom. Through the wide windows, the Colorado sky burned crimson, like a wound in the process of healing. The final rays spilled across Emily and Ethan's faces, tinting them with a warm amber glow. I let out a long breath, the first in months, that did not feel weighted with dread. Tonight was an ending, yes, but it was also the threshold of something new. At my age, I no longer crave triumphs or glory. All I ask is this, that justice is carried out, that my family remains whole, and that the truth does not stay buried. That, I have come to realize, is the greatest gift life can offer. Thank you for walking with me and my family through this journey of tears, danger, and at last the light of justice. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Every word you leave behind is a source of strength that encourages me to keep bringing stories that speak to the truth of love, trust, and courage. Tell me what moment moved you the most. Was there a turning point when you thought, everything has changed now? I would be honored to read your reflections. And if you want to continue with more powerful stories, tales of family secrets, betrayals, and resilience that you've never heard before, click the box on the left to move on to the next chapter. Believe me, you won't want to miss it. Once again, thank you for watching. Your support not only helps this channel grow, but also ensures that stories like this continue to reach and inspire more people around the world.